Warren Buffett once turned down a meeting that would have made him $300 million in 30 minutes. The person offering the deal was legitimate, the math was solid, but Buffett said no without hesitation. And here's what makes this disturbing. His reasoning would sound completely insane to 99% of people. It wasn't about the money, it wasn't about risk. It was about something far more valuable that most of us give away for free every single day. You're about to discover why the wealthiest people on the planet make decisions that look irrational to everyone else. Not because they're smarter, not because they have information you don't, but because they've rewired their brains to see patterns that are invisible to normal thinking. These aren't motivational stories about working harder. This is about the cognitive architecture that separates someone who builds a $50 million company from someone who builds a $50 billion empire. By the end of this video, you'll understand why Jeff Bezos intentionally makes himself stupider before big decisions, why Ray Dalio built a machine that argues with him, and why the single most profitable decision Elon Musk ever made looked like complete self-sabotage to every expert who analyzed it. These decision rules exist in a different dimension than conventional business wisdom. And once you see them, you can't unsee them. Let's start with something that sounds completely backwards. While everyone talks about making better decisions, billionaires obsess over making fewer decisions. This isn't about laziness or delegation. It's about understanding something that modern psychology calls ego depletion, though billionaires were using this principle decades before scientists had a name for it. Steve Jobs wore the same outfit every day. Mark Zuckerberg does the same. Barack Obama, during his presidency, explained that he only wears gray or blue suits because he has too many other decisions to make. On the surface, this seems trivial, but here's what's actually happening in their brains. Every decision you make, from what to eat for breakfast to which email to answer first, depletes the same cognitive resource. Your brain treats a decision about socks exactly the same way it treats a decision about $1 million investment. Same neural pathways, same glucose consumption, same mental energy drain. Roy Baumeister proved this in his famous Radish experiment. Participants who were forced to resist eating chocolate chip cookies gave up on difficult puzzles much faster than participants who didn't have to resist. Making decisions about one thing depletes your capacity to make decisions about everything else. And billionaires have figured out something crucial. If you're going to make 3 genuinely important decisions in your entire year, decisions that determine the trajectory of your life or company, you cannot afford to waste your decision-making capacity on trivial choices. Think about your own life for a moment. You probably make hundreds of micro decisions before 9 a.m. What to wear, what to eat, which route to take, whether to check your phone. Each one feels meaningless. But cumulatively, by the time you sit down to do important work, your prefrontal cortex is already running on fumes. You're trying to make strategic decisions with a depleted battery. Meanwhile, someone like Bezos has protected his cognitive resources like a fortress. He's not making better decisions. He's simply capable of making decisions when you're not. But here's where it gets interesting. This principle goes deeper than just reducing choices. It's about creating asymmetry in your decision-making power. And this is where most people completely miss the point. Elon Musk was broke. Actually broke, not startup founder playing poor broke. In 2008, he had a choice. He had about $40 million left, enough to save either Tesla or SpaceX, but not both. Both companies were weeks from bankruptcy. Every advisor told him to save one and let the other die. That's basic decision theory, basic portfolio management, basic risk assessment. Cut your losses, salvage what you can. Musk did something that looked clinically insane. He split the money between both companies. This guaranteed that he'd probably lose everything. If one company failed, he wouldn't have enough left to save the other. It was a decision that violated every rule of rational resource allocation. But Musk wasn't thinking in terms of normal risk assessment. He was using a mental model that billionaires understand but rarely talk about. It's called antifragility, though he probably didn't use that term. Nassim Taleb articulated this concept later, but Musk was living it. Here's how it works. When you have optionality, you gain from randomness rather than suffer from it. By keeping both companies alive, even barely alive, Musk created multiple paths to success. If either company figured it out, the other would suddenly have access to capital, attention, and momentum. Normal thinking says minimize downside. A billionaire thinking says maximize optionality, even at the cost of increasing your probability of total failure. Because total failure and almost complete failure produce the same result. You're done. But keeping multiple options alive, even weakly alive, creates compound possibilities that don't exist in the single bet scenario. Tesla's progress gave SpaceX credibility. SpaceX's breakthrough gave Tesla's stock a narrative. The failures in one company created lessons that prevented failures in the other. Think about your own decisions. When you face a fork in the road, you probably try to pick the best path, close the other doors, commit fully. This feels responsible. But what you're actually doing is destroying optionality. You're making yourself fragile. A billionaire would keep both doors open even if it means moving slower through each one, because they're not optimizing for the next quarter. They're optimizing for the one scenario in 10 where everything compounds exponentially. Now, most people would assume that this kind of thinking requires enormous confidence. That billionaires just trust their gut and make bold moves. But the reality is the exact opposite, and this might be the most counterintuitive pattern of all. Jeff Bezos built a decision-making framework that he calls disagree and commit, but the way he actually uses it reveals something much stranger. Before any major decision at Amazon, Bezos intentionally surrounds himself with people who will tell him he's wrong. He's documented asking people to argue against his position even when they agree with him. He forces them to steelman the opposing view. He rewards people who change his mind. This sounds like standard devil's advocate stuff that any business school teaches. But most people miss what's really happening here. Bezos is fighting against something psychologists call confirmation bias. The human brain doesn't want to know the truth. It wants to confirm what it already believes. This isn't a flaw. It's a feature that helped our ancestors survive. If your tribe believes the river is dangerous and you start questioning that belief, you might die testing your hypothesis. Better to just trust the consensus and stay safe. Confirmation bias kept humans alive for millions of years. But it's a catastrophic liability when making complex decisions with second and third order consequences. Here's where Bezos goes further than most people understand. He doesn't just welcome disagreement. He structures the environment to make disagreement more comfortable than agreement. At Amazon leadership meetings, if everyone agrees too quickly, Bezos becomes suspicious. He'll often table the decision and ask people to come back with reasons why they're wrong. He's literally making his own brain stupider by design. He's deliberately injecting friction into his thinking process because he knows that his gut instinct, his pattern recognition, his experience, all of these things are contaminated by bias. This connects to something Daniel Kahneman spent his entire career studying. Kahneman showed that experts are often more biased than novices in their field because they trust their intuition too much. A doctor who's seen 1,000 cases will sometimes miss the obvious diagnosis because it doesn't fit their pattern. They're not seeing what's in front of them. They're seeing their mental model of what should be there. Bezos has built a system that attacks his own expertise. He knows he can't trust himself, so he doesn't compare this to how most people make decisions. You have an idea. You Google it. You find 3 articles that support your idea. You ignore the articles that don't. You tell yourself you've done research. But what you've actually done is launder your bias through external sources. You've built an evidence fortress around your pre-existing belief. Bezos is doing the opposite. He's actively trying to destroy his own fortress. He's looking for the one piece of evidence that proves he's wrong, because finding that evidence before you commit is infinitely cheaper than discovering it after you've bet the company. But here's what makes this even more fascinating. There's a decision rule that goes beyond just seeking disagreement. It's about fundamentally restructuring how you frame the decision itself. Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's partner, uses a technique he calls inversion. Instead of asking how to succeed, he asks how to fail. Instead of asking what to do, he asks what to avoid. This sounds like a semantic trick, but it's actually exploiting a deep asymmetry in human cognition. Your brain is much better at identifying what's dangerous than identifying what's beneficial. This makes evolutionary sense. Miss an opportunity, you're hungry today. Miss a predator, you're dead forever. Munger applies this to investing. He doesn't ask which companies will succeed. He asks which companies will definitely fail. And then he avoids those. What's left is a much smaller universe of possibilities. But they're possibilities that have survived a negative filter. They're antifragile by design. Buffett has said that their success comes not from hitting home runs, but from avoiding strikeouts. They're not trying to be right. They're trying to avoid being catastrophically wrong. Here's a specific example that demonstrates how powerful this is. In the late 90s, everyone was investing in .com companies. The market was euphoric. But Munger and Buffett asked a different question. They didn't ask which .com would win. They asked what would cause a .com to fail, and the answer was obvious. Most of these companies had no path to profitability. They were burning capital with no clear unit economics. Once the capital dried up, they'd die. Didn't matter how much traffic they had. Didn't matter how innovative their product was. No path to profit equals eventual death. So Buffett and Munger simply avoided the entire category. They looked stupid for years while the market went up. Then they looked like geniuses when it crashed. But here's what most people miss about inversion. It's not just about risk management. It's about attention allocation. If you're constantly asking how to succeed, you're looking at an infinite possibility space. There are millions of ways things could go right, but there are usually only 5 or 6 ways things go catastrophically wrong. By identifying those failure modes, first, you dramatically reduce your search space. You can focus your limited cognitive resources on a smaller set of possibilities that have already cleared the biggest hurdles. Think about your own goals. You probably have a vision of success, a target outcome, and you're trying to figure out how to get there. But what if you inverted the question? What would definitely prevent you from getting there? What are the 5 things that, if they happened, would make success impossible? Now structure your life to make those 5 things impossible. What's left is a much clearer path. You're not trying to find the one right way forward. You're eliminating the obvious ways to fail, and what remains is a landscape where success becomes almost inevitable. This connects to something even deeper about how billionaires think about probability. And this is where normal intuition completely breaks down. Most people think in terms of single outcomes. Will this work or not? Yes or no. Binary thinking. But billionaires think in terms of probability distributions. And more importantly, they understand that the average outcome is almost never what actually happens. Let me explain what this means. When Bezos decided to start AWS, Amazon's cloud computing service, the internal projections showed it would probably lose money for years. The average expected outcome was negative. But Bezos didn't care about the average. He cared about the shape of the distribution. There was a small probability that AWS would become wildly successful. And if that happened, it would be so successful that it would subsidize everything else Amazon did. The downside was capped. The upside was exponential. This is what Taleb calls a barbell strategy. You put 90% of your resources in safe, predictable investments, and you put 10% in crazy bets with unlimited upside. The average return of those crazy bets is negative. But you're not playing for average. You're playing for the one hit that pays for 1,000 misses. Bezos structured AWS exactly this way. Small investment relative to Amazon's total capital. But if it worked, it would change everything. And this is precisely what happened. AWS now generates more operating income than Amazon's entire retail business. It funds all of Amazon's experimental ventures. It gives them a cushion that competitors don't have. But here's the key insight. If Bezos had evaluated AWS based on expected value, he probably would have killed it. The math said no. But he wasn't looking at expected value. He was looking at the shape of possibilities. He was optimizing for the fat tail, not the mean. Most people do the exact opposite. They avoid anything where the most likely outcome is failure, even if the unlikely success would be transformational. They're optimizing for batting average instead of total runs scored. They're playing it safe in a game where safe guarantees mediocrity. Billionaires understand something fundamental about modern markets. The variance matters more than the mean. The distribution matters more than the average. And the single breakthrough matters more than 1,000 incremental improvements. Now here's where this gets really interesting. There's a decision pattern that ties all of these principles together, and it's probably the most unintuitive one of all. Ray Dalio runs one of the most successful hedge funds in history. Bridgewater Associates manages about $150 billion. And Dalio has built something that most people would consider insane. He created an algorithm that rates his own decision-making. It gives him a score based on his past accuracy in different domains. And here's the disturbing part. When Dalio's score in a particular area is low, he's contractually obligated to defer to other people's judgment, even if he disagrees, even if he founded the company, even if he's Ray Dalio. Think about what this means. Dalio has externalized his own ego. He's built a system that overrides his personal judgment based on statistical evidence of his past performance. This violates every instinct humans have. We want to believe we're right. We want to trust ourselves. We especially want control over our own decisions. But Dalio has recognized something that most people never accept. Your past performance is data. And data should determine who makes decisions. Not hierarchy, not experience, not confidence, just track record. This is what psychologists call metacognition. Thinking about thinking. Dalio isn't just making decisions. He's evaluating his process for making decisions. He's treating himself as a black box with inputs and outputs, and he's measuring the quality of that black box over time. When the black box performs poorly in certain conditions, he stops using it in those conditions. It doesn't matter that he's Ray Dalio. The data says he's wrong more often than right in this domain. So someone else decides. Most people never achieve this level of self-awareness. And more importantly, they never act on it even when they do. You might know you're bad at something, but you still want to do it your way. You want to feel in control. Dalio has surrendered control to a process, and paradoxically, this has given him more control over outcomes. Because outcomes don't care about your ego. They only care about the quality of decisions. Here's a practical example of how this works. Dalio noticed he was bad at predicting short-term market moves. His long-term strategic thinking was excellent, but in day-to-day trading, he was wrong more often than a coin flip. So he built a team of people who were good at short-term predictions, and he gave them decision-making authority in that domain, not because he wanted to, but because the data said they were better. His fund's performance immediately improved, not because he got better at short-term trading, but because he stopped doing it. This reveals something crucial about billionaire psychology. They're not trying to be good at everything. They're trying to build systems where their weaknesses become irrelevant. Normal people try to improve their weaknesses. Billionaires try to make decisions in domains where their weaknesses never matter. It's a completely different approach to self-improvement. You're not fixing yourself. You're structuring your environment so the broken parts of you never get activated. But there's one more layer to this that almost nobody talks about, and it might be the most important pattern of all. Warren Buffett spends 80% of his day reading. Not emails, not reports. Books, academic papers, annual reports from companies he'll never invest in. He's called himself a learning machine. But here's what makes this different from normal reading. Buffett isn't reading to learn facts. He's reading to install mental models. He's building a library of patterns in his brain, and these patterns let him see things that are invisible to everyone else. There's a concept in cognitive science called chunking. Expert chess players don't see individual pieces on the board. They see patterns, configurations, gambits. A grandmaster can glance at a board for 5 seconds and remember the entire position, but only if it's from a real game. Show them random pieces and they perform no better than a beginner. Why? Because expertise isn't about memory. It's about pattern recognition. They've stored thousands of meaningful patterns. And when they see a position, they're matching it against their library. Buffett has done this with business. He's studied thousands of companies, read thousands of annual reports, analyzed thousands of decisions. He's not smarter than other investors. He's installed more patterns. When he looks at a company, he's not analyzing it from scratch. He's matching it against his library. Does this look like the companies that failed in the 70s? Does this look like the companies that succeeded in the 80s? What pattern am I seeing? This is why Buffett can make investment decisions in minutes that take other people months. He's not working harder. He's matching patterns. And this is why he can stay in his circle of competence. He knows which patterns are in his library and which ones aren't. When he sees a company outside his library, he doesn't pretend he can analyze it. He says, "I don't know," and he walks away. Most people do the opposite. They encounter something unfamiliar and they fake it. They pretend their existing patterns apply. They make analogies that don't hold. They convince themselves they understand when they don't. And this is where catastrophic decisions happen, not from ignorance, but from false confidence in pattern matching. You think you're seeing pattern A, but you're actually looking at pattern B that superficially resembles A, and by the time you realize your mistake, you've bet everything on a flawed analogy. Billionaires have a different relationship with the phrase "I don't know." They treat it as valuable information. When Buffett says he doesn't understand something, that's not a weakness. That's a boundary marker. Here's where my patterns end. Here's where I stop being an expert and become a gambler. And Buffett doesn't gamble. He only plays games where he has an edge. And the edge comes from pattern recognition. No patterns, no bet. It's that simple. Now here's what ties all of these decision rules together. And this is the insight that makes everything click into place. Billionaires aren't optimizing for success. They're optimizing for survival. This sounds wrong. You'd think someone building $1 trillion company is swinging for the fences, taking huge risks. But the opposite is true. They're pathologically risk-averse in certain dimensions. Bezos has a regret minimization framework. Before any major decision, he imagines himself at 80 years old looking back. Will I regret not doing this? That's his decision rule. But notice what he's not asking. He's not asking, will this succeed? He's asking, can I live with failure? Musk has said his primary goal with SpaceX wasn't to make money. It was to not go bankrupt long enough to make progress toward Mars. That's a survival goal, not a success goal. Keep the company alive. Extend the runway. Create more at-bats. The longer you survive, the more chances you get, and in a world with fat-tailed distributions, more chances doesn't just increase your probability of success linearly. It increases it exponentially because you're buying more lottery tickets where the jackpot is unlimited. This is the fundamental difference between billionaire thinking and normal thinking. Normal thinking asks how to win. Billionaire thinking asks how to stay in the game. Because if you can stay in the game long enough in a world with exponential outcomes, winning becomes almost inevitable. You're not trying to be right. You're trying to not be eliminated. You're not trying to hit home runs. You're trying to avoid strikeouts. You're not trying to make the best decision. You're trying to avoid catastrophic decisions. And here's the paradox. By obsessing over survival, by being pathologically conservative in certain ways, you create the conditions for exponential success. Because exponential success requires time. It requires staying power. It requires being around for the one moment when everything compounds. And most people don't make it that far. They flame out early chasing the big win. They die before the compounding happens. So let's bring this full circle. Warren Buffett turned down that $300 million meeting because it would have cost him something more valuable than money. It would have cost him time. Time he could spend reading, installing patterns, building his library, making himself better at the one thing he's truly great at. That meeting was a distraction, a shiny object. And Buffett has an allergic reaction to shiny objects. Because he knows that success isn't about maximizing opportunities. It's about ruthlessly eliminating everything that isn't your one thing. The hidden decision rules aren't about being smarter. They're about seeing a different game. Most people are playing checkers, trying to capture pieces, trying to win individual moves. Billionaires are playing chess, thinking 5 moves ahead, sacrificing pieces to create positions, optimizing for endgame scenarios that don't make sense in the current moment. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Once you see the chess game, checkers looks irrational. Once you see the patterns, normal thinking looks random. Once you see the decision rules, conventional wisdom looks like noise. You don't need to be a billionaire to use these rules. But you do need to accept something difficult. You need to accept that your instincts are wrong, that your gut is lying to you. That the things that feel right are precisely the things that will keep you average. Because your instincts were calibrated for a world that doesn't exist anymore. A world where survival meant following the tribe, trusting your gut, avoiding risk. That world is gone. And the people who figured out how to rewire their brains for this new world, they're the ones building trillion-dollar companies while everyone else wonders what they're missing. The answer is they're not missing information. They're missing the rules. The hidden architecture of decision, making that turns noise into signal, chaos into clarity, uncertainty into asymmetric opportunity. These rules exist. They're learnable. But first you have to see them. And you can't unsee what you've just seen.